You've probably done something today without thinking. Checked your phone, opened an app, did something automatically, and you didn't even notice it. That's normal. Hello, and welcome back to Bookworm. Today we're diving into The Power of Habit, a book that explains something simple but powerful. A large part of your life is automatic, not conscious, not intentional, automatic. Your brain creates patterns, repeats them, and eventually you stop choosing. You just act. And the strange part, it feels like a decision. Stay with me as we dive deeper, because once you understand these, you'll start noticing how much of your life is running on autopilot. And if you enjoy content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome to this explainer on the power of habit. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder why you do what you do? We really, truly like to think of ourselves as these completely rational creatures, deliberately navigating our days. We think we're consciously choosing what to eat, deciding what to say, carefully calculating how to spend our money. But the fascinating and, honestly, slightly unnerving reality is that our daily lives are largely driven by invisible neurological loops, not conscious choices at all. So today, we are going to unpack the hidden mechanics behind human behavior. And as you'll see, it turns out these invisible loops don't just dictate what we grab for lunch or how we tackle our overflowing inbox, they literally shape our long-term outcomes and our very identities. It's a real game changer.
Think about your morning just for a second. You probably woke up, reached blindly for your phone, did the zombie walk along the exact same path to the kitchen, and eventually drove your standard memorized route to work. And you did all of this without making a single, deliberate, conscious decision. Well, a landmark 2006 study from a researcher at Duke University revealed something completely staggering about this. More than 40% of the actions people perform every single day aren't actual decisions at all. No, they are unthinking, automatic habits.
So, that begs a pretty profound question. If almost half of your daily actions are running purely on autopilot, who or what is really driving your decisions? Are you truly in control of your choices, or are you just running on a pre-programmed script in the background? Understanding the answer to this is absolutely crucial. It's the very first step toward fundamentally changing your life, your health, and your everyday productivity.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the autopilot brain. Second, the habit loop. Third, the power of craving. Fourth, the golden rule. And finally, reclaiming your choices, where we'll build out a practical toolkit for remodeling your behavior.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, the autopilot brain, and why our brains absolutely love routines. So our brains are incredibly efficient machines. They are constantly, relentlessly looking for ways to save effort. Left to its own devices, your brain will try to make almost any routine into a habit. Why? Because automating behaviors conserves vital mental energy. It allows our minds to sort of ramp down so we can devote our heavy-lifting brain power to much more complex problems. And the brain achieves this amazing efficiency through a process called chunking. Chunking is exactly how a complex sequence of actions gets converted into one smooth automatic routine. Think about the incredibly complex act of backing a car out of a driveway. When you first learned to drive, oh man, it required massive concentration, right? You were completely overwhelmed by sensory input. You're checking the rearview mirror, checking the side mirrors, making sure you're pressing the right pedal, constantly monitoring the street for pedestrians. It was exhausting. Now, you just do it effortlessly while singing along to the radio and thinking about your grocery list. Your brain has successfully chunked millions of bits of information into one single automatic habit. And this creates a really stark contrast between our active brain and our autopilot brain. The active brain requires heavy concentration and a lot of deliberate effort. The autopilot brain, on the other hand, saves energy. And historically, that's a massive evolutionary advantage. It's what kept our ancestors alive. It allowed them to invent complex tools while unthinkingly walking long distances. But, there is a bit of a dark side to this energy-saving instinct. There's a primitive part of our brain called the basal ganglia, and honestly, it does not care if the routine is a healthy morning jog or a toxic smoking habit. It just wants to save energy. Because the brain literally cannot tell the difference between a good habit and a bad one, bad habits are incredibly hard to break once they are locked in. So, if our brain operates on these chunks, how do they actually form in the first place? Let's transition from the macro concept of the autopilot brain down to the specific mechanical structure of every single habit.
Moving right along to part 2, the habit loop, the anatomy of our actions. At the absolute core of every habit is a remarkably simple three-step neurological loop, which was discovered by researchers at MIT. First up, there's a cue. This is a trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode. Second, there's the routine itself. This can be a physical, mental, or even emotional behavior. And finally, the reward. This is the payoff that helps your brain figure out if this specific loop is worth remembering for the future. So that's it. Cue, routine, reward.
To prove how powerful this is, the MIT researchers put a rat in a maze. Now, the cue here was just a simple click sound. When the rat heard the click, a partition opened. Initially, the rat wandered around actively. It was sniffing corners, scratching at the walls, taking all these wrong turns. During this phase, its brain activity was completely off the charts as it tried to actively process all this new information. But soon, it figured it out and developed a routine. Hear the click, run straight down the maze, and find the reward, a piece of chocolate. As this loop repeated day after day, something completely incredible happened. The rat's brain activity actually flatlined during the run. It literally wasn't thinking anymore. The entire behavior had become completely, perfectly automated. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens in our own lives every single day. We are hijacked by small triggers in the exact same way as that rat. Take a look at a destructive distraction habit, for example. Your phone simply buzzes on your desk. That's the cue. Your attention is instantly hijacked. You pick it up and check your email, that's the routine. And you get a momentary feeling of distraction from your stressful work. That's the reward. Now compare that with a positive habit. You see your running shoes sitting by the front door. The cue. You go out for a jog, the routine. You feel an amazing endorphin rush, the reward. The underlying neurological mechanism is absolutely identical in both scenarios. It's wild. But here's the thing. A cue and a reward alone aren't enough to make a new habit last over the long term. There is a missing piece to this puzzle. Let's look at the invisible engine that actually powers the habit loop over time, locking it into our neurology and often making us feel totally out of control.
Which brings us to part 3, the power of craving, and why these habits actually stick.
Over time, the cue and the reward become incredibly tightly intertwined until a powerful, subconscious anticipation emerges. Take the smoking habit loop, for example. The cue isn't just a simple, neutral trigger anymore. It triggers a deep, intense craving. When a smoker sees a pack of cigarettes, their brain actually starts anticipating the nicotine hit before they even pick one up. The brain literally begins experiencing the chemical expectation of the reward beforehand. That is exactly why missing the reward feels like a painful physical withdrawal. If that reward doesn't arrive, the craving grows into a roaring monster, driving the routine forward unthinkingly.
The core thesis here is that cravings are what drive habits. This is why behavior is so incredibly persistent. Actually, think about a Cinnabon store in a shopping mall. Have you ever noticed they are strategically placed far away from the other food stalls? That's so the smell of the cinnamon reaches you long before you actually see the store, sparking a powerful craving before you're even consciously aware of it. Whether it's the urge to bite your nails when you feel a pang of anxiety, or that deeply relatable desire for a sugary soda right when the 3 p.m. afternoon crash hits, anticipation is the glue of the habit loop. So if habits are locked in by powerful cravings and run on complete autopilot, are we just doomed to repeat them forever? Absolutely not. No way. This brings us to the solution phase of our explainer. Let's look at how you can actually rewire these circuits.
Part 4. The Golden Rule. How to actually change a habit.
Now, what's really interesting here is a framework known as the Golden Rule of Habit Change. The rule is profound, but surprisingly simple. You cannot simply eradicate a bad habit. It is physically encoded into your brain's neural pathways. But you can change it. How? Well, you do it by keeping the old cue and keeping the old reward, but deliberately inserting a brand new routine right in the middle.
Let's walk through how this works in practice. Imagine a smoker who realizes that they don't actually crave nicotine. What they really crave is a quick burst of stimulation or just a brief break from staring at their computer screen. The cue is feeling bored at work. The reward is that jolt of stimulation. By applying the golden rule, they keep the cue and they keep the reward, but they deliberately swap out the cigarette routine for a quick coffee break or maybe just a few minutes of stretching in the hallway. I really want to emphasize this. It's the exact same cue, the exact same reward, but a completely different behavior. So the crucial takeaway here is this. Habits cannot be eradicated. They absolutely must be replaced. Replacing rather than eliminating is the secret to why some people seemingly transform their lives with ease while others just struggle for years and years. Look, change takes real work, and it requires some deep self-understanding.
But once you break your behavior down into its mechanical component parts, you are no longer at the mercy of your subconscious. You can basically open up the hood and deliberately fiddle with the gears of the loop. So now that we know the golden rule, how do we actually apply it to our messy, complicated, everyday lives? Let's walk through an actionable toolkit you can use to redesign your habits and ultimately reclaim your choices.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Reclaiming Your Choices. Let's build a framework for change.
The author provides a proven 4-step framework for diagnosing and dismantling self-destructive behaviors. Think of this almost like a detective process. You are going to treat your own life like a laboratory. Step 1, identify the routine. This is the actual behavior you want to change. Step 2, experiment with rewards. You have to figure out what craving is actually driving you. Step 3, isolate the cue amid all the chaotic daily noise of your life. And step 4, have a concrete, specific plan to respond to that cue.
Let's ground this framework in a highly relatable, everyday scenario straight from the author's own life. He had this bad habit of going to the cafeteria every single afternoon at exactly 3:30 p.m. to eat a chocolate chip cookie. And eventually, this habit caused him to gain 8 pounds. To stop, he treated himself like a test subject. He identified the routine, walking down and buying the cookie. Then he experimented. One day, he ate an apple instead. Another day, he took a quick walk around the block. Another day, he just went over to a friend's desk for a chat without eating anything at all. Through this experiment, he realized something huge. The reward he actually craved wasn't the sugar at all. It was the socializing with colleagues to break up the monotony of the workday. Next, he isolated the cue, the time of day, specifically 3:30 p.m. Armed with this data, he replaced the routine. Now, at 3:30, he just walks over to a friend's desk to gossip for 10 minutes. He kept the cue, he kept the reward, but the bad cookie-eating habit was completely rewritten.
The research shows that while this mechanical framework is absolutely essential, there is one more ingredient required for true, long-term transformation: belief. The author notes, if you believe you can change, if you make it a habit, the change becomes real. Understanding the invisible mechanics of your habits gives you incredible empowerment. Remember that 40% statistic from the very beginning of our explainer? If you deliberately change your habits using this framework, you aren't just tweaking your day, you are fundamentally changing 40% of your existence. Over months and years, that rewritten 40% reshapes your entire identity. And with that freedom comes the responsibility to actively remake the routines that are holding you back.
Your life, in many ways, is just a giant mess of habits, but they are not your destiny. You now have the tools to step off autopilot. You know exactly how to spot the cue, how to identify the hidden craving, how to deliver the underlying reward, and successfully install a brand new routine. So I will leave you with this one thought to ponder. Which habit will you rewrite today?
If there's one idea to take from this book, it's this: you are not fully in control, your habits are. The power of habit shows that small repeated actions shape your behavior, your routine, your life, and once a habit is formed, it doesn't just disappear, it stays. That's why change feels hard. But here's the key: you don't break habits, you replace them, you keep the same loop, but change the behavior inside it. And that changes everything. If this made you think about your own patterns, like the video, subscribe to Bookworm and stay aware. Because sometimes you're not choosing, you're repeating.